Okay, well, thank you all for joining us here in the post-lunch panel. Probably one of the more challenging time slots, having been in that time slot myself, to teach or be on panels, but this should be very interesting as well. Unfortunately, Claude Hutchinson had a family emergency and he was unable to join us today. And Gordon Erstremer, who moderated the panel of judges last night and did a fabulous job, unfortunately had injured his shoulder earlier this week, and with the BART strike, he's unable to drive and unable to get in otherwise. So we're sorry that he's not here as well. Dan DeVoy will moderate the panel, and I will introduce him. He is a 2010 alumnus of Golden Gate Law School. He leads his own practice, Jones and DeVoy, focuses his pro bono service on veterans benefits, is an adjunct professor leading our Veterans Benefits Externship Clinic, and is a distinguished veteran himself. He served 2 enlistments in the U.S. Army as a non-commissioned officer. He was awarded the Meritorious Service Medal for the Combat Infantry Badge, Expert Infantry Badge, and the Presidential Unit Citation. He is a member of the Iraq-Afghanistan Veterans Association and the Veterans of Foreign Wars. Thank you so much for leading this panel.
Thank you all for being here. Very nice to be here. Let me first introduce our panel. We have first with us Teresa Pancantino from the great organization known as Swords to Plowshare. They're a nonprofit here in San Francisco. What they do is they help all veterans obtain VA benefits as well as discharge upgrades. Thank you, Teresa. Then we have Edward Faby. Edward is the registered in-house counsel for Sutter Health, the largest nonprofit healthcare organization in Northern California. He's also Lieutenant Colonel in the U.S. Air Force Judge Advocate General Corps Reserve, and he's a graduate of UC Berkeley and the University of Washington School of Law. What I thought would be a good way to start off is I'm going to introduce a few topics. If anyone has another topic, please feel free to raise your hand and we'll all discuss. So the first topic I wanted to discuss was, as we've all seen on the news, the budget battles in Congress and how that budget battle affects the budget for the VA, specifically what that does to veterans waiting to obtain service-connected benefits and other VA benefits. So would one of you like to take off on that?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I apologize in advance that I'm a bit under the weather, so apologies for the gravelly voice, and I hope you can all hear me okay. So first of all, I just want to thank Dan and Rachel and Golden Gate University for inviting me to speak here. I'm excited about this Vets Law Conference. So we certainly had some very tense days over the last few weeks with the government shutdown. Here in San Francisco, we serve approximately 2,000 veterans every year, and we work primarily with homeless and very low-income veterans, individuals who have no other source of income other than the VA disability pension or disability compensation. And as you all can imagine, the prospect of not having that safety net was extremely difficult for many veterans. When we're talking about literally veins of life or death survival, really, could someone pay rent, buy groceries, provide for themselves or their families? And of course, we also look at what would that mean for organizations' ability, our organization and other organizations' abilities to continue to provide services with the government shutdown. Thankfully, that's been temporarily resolved, but it's certainly an ongoing concern. And I know with our budget battles, of course, we're a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization, and we simply work with any and all in government power to just constantly remind them about the needs of veterans that really transcend politics. Government made an obligation to individuals who served in the military, and regardless of what political battles there may be on Capitol Hill, that obligation can't be, that responsibility can't be shirked. Anything you want to add?
Sure. And like my colleague, let me go ahead and thank you all for being here today. I know that this is a Friday afternoon with incredibly gorgeous weather and probably the prettiest city on the entire planet, and yet you all are sitting here in what feels like a basement, listening to folks who could not possibly be any more boring. So I congratulate you on your attrition of the water torture that you will probably be experiencing today. And for those of you that are not veterans, have not served in the military, I thank you for being here today, being interested in the topic, because there are things that you and your colleagues can do for those veterans, either now or in the future. And for those of you that actually have served in the United States military, I thank you for your service, because there is no greater cause than to serve in the defense of this greatest nation on the planet. Having said that, for those individuals who my colleague was talking about with regards to having their lives depend upon that disability check that was going to be essentially cut off. For those of you that didn't follow it very closely, there was a lot of mixed messages that were going on coming from the federal government and from the VA. First, what they called a field guide went out that said, there will not be any stoppage of payment. We will make certain that these folks are getting paid because they are our mission. And then, what was then sent, kind of surreptitiously by others who anonymously gave the information, so to speak, they indicated, we've been told that by late October, those payments will stop because we have no more money. So, yeah, again, for those of you that are unfamiliar with the federal government, that was the quintessential double talk that comes out with regards to payments and funding. But ultimately, thankfully, that issue has been resolved, because had it not been resolved, I'm fairly certain that we would have experienced the latter rather than the former with regards to the information that was coming out. Having said that, even that being the case, I believe it was the last 14, 15 days regarding the shutdown, there were many effects affecting veterans and their family members with regards to their ability to receive services. And it's unfortunate that was the case, that the folks that gave the most for their country were the ones that are among the most deeply affected by it, not just by rent checks, but also by their health care. Because one of the things that was going on, despite not being publicized very well, was the fact that funding for medical care, whether it be through Social Security, Medicare, or the VA facilities, was being rationed. And unfortunately, there were some folks that got caught up into it. Now, hopefully, that has all been resolved. I have not heard of any recent concerns since the deal. So I'm going to give optimism and hope a chance and believe that those issues have been resolved.
And if I can just add to that, I know it's certainly no secret to anyone here, or really to anyone who watches the news, that the VA has had this backlog for a very long time. And I hope, Dan, I'm not skipping ahead.
Oh, no, I actually was just going to introduce that topic.
Oh, okay.
With respect to the backlog. In your experience, how long is that backlog? Are there any proposed remedies for it?
Sure. So the backlog nationwide, I believe, is approximately 681,000 VA disability claims right now. It was very interesting to see the connection between the shutdown, what you were talking about, some things that were certain offices and services in VA that did have to shut down, and the backlog. We often visit the VA's regional office in Oakland. That's where all veterans from Northern California have their benefits claims adjudicated, filed, etc. Because VA can also be fairly infamous for losing paperwork, we generally file all applications and other materials in person, go to the office, get a time and date stamp on all paperwork. So silly us, when the shutdown began, one of our staff attorneys took Bar over to the Oakland Regional Office and went to file, and oh, the public contact office was closed. We also work very closely with VA's FOIA office, Freedom of Information Act office, for release of records. That was closed. We spoke with an adjudicator at a VA regional office in Wichita, Kansas. One of the ways that VA has tried to deal with the backlog is by shipping claims out from their usual regional offices to other smaller offices that may not have as big of a workload. So of course, as we can imagine, the population in Kansas is just a little bit smaller than the California population here, right? So their decision review officer, someone who adjudicates an appealed claim, called us just last week to say, I'd really like to settle this claim. We need to talk about this because come Monday I may be furloughed for 2 months. And that means making that appeal that much longer. We also heard that what was happening was VA had ceased work on all appeals. Just to give folks an idea of what someone might be facing, and then I'm going to pass it off to my colleague. So I mentioned earlier about 681,000 claims nationwide, and that data I think was from the end of September, so it could be different now. It changes week to week. But in the Oakland regional office, again talking about all Northern California veterans, there's such a long wait period. An individual veteran who files a claim, first time ever, is waiting approximately 685 days for a decision. I know that's a very, very, very long time to wait, particularly when we think about two of the biggest pockets of veterans who apply for benefits. You're often looking at Vietnam-era veterans, many of whom are in ill health at this point, and many health conditions that may occur as a result of Agent Orange exposure, but are just starting to surface. Prostate cancer, other forms of cancer, diabetes, et cetera, all kinds of issues, and where veterans may really need that extra disability income, but they're having to wait 685 days. There's also another big population of veterans. We hear so much about so many current era veterans, individuals who've served since September 11th, 2001, and there are some real differences with this younger generation of veterans that we've seen who we work with, one of which is many of them have started families at much younger ages. And so we're talking about not only needing to support the individual veteran, but families and small children as well, who are having to wait such a long time. Appeals in the Oakland Regional Office, the average processing time is almost 1,400 days. 1,397 days. It's the average processing time for an appeal. So again, waiting for that income. We've got individuals who have earned this benefit through their military service, and not much is happening. So I'm going to turn it over to you so I don't keep chatting here, but get back to your other part of the question about remedies.
Well, I appreciate the statistics. That's actually very, very enlightening. I was not aware of the lengthy delay in those processing of services. I can only speak from personal experience. When I left active duty back in 2008, I filed my disability, VA disability claim immediately, but actually as soon as I could, right as I left service. And that was in 2008. I did not get a final decision on my disability claim until 2011. So it mirrors exactly my experience. I had hoped that that was simply a glitch and a result of me moving out of the area from which I had last been stationed, and perhaps the paperwork just took some time in order to follow me. But the information that's being provided here today seems to indicate that that's not the case. But I can tell you, in talking with my colleagues over at the VA, they indicate that they have received essentially several edicts from various levels of management to say, you will complete these claims, you will have a turnaround, you will have a suspense time of essentially of a year. What I'm being told by them is that that is just not possible. The amount of claims that are coming in, the amount of personnel that they have, the amount of detail that they have to go through in order to review the medical charts, the military records of the individual, there's just virtually no way that they are going to be able to meet that type of a suspense date. So while I appreciate the ability to say, well, we are mandating our folks to get this done within a reasonable time frame, the reality is that you can push the horse as much as you want, but on 3 legs, it's not going to go faster than 10 miles an hour. So in this particular case, until the funding comes through for increased VA capability, I don't see a change in the current timetable standards.
Yeah, I thank you for that. I certainly agree with that. And we do this work day in, day out, representing veterans. And we work closely with other veteran service organizations, policy institutions, et cetera. And we very much applaud the VA in its efforts for trying to make changes, trying to make reforms. I certainly recognize that this is a problem. And there have been a lot of solutions that they have proposed, things they're doing. They're certainly relying a lot on technology and seeing how can we utilize technology to get this under control. One example of that is they've talked a lot about electronic records. So one of my colleagues was just at a conference a few weeks ago where the head of the VA's compensation service was there, and he gave an address, and he talked a lot about this movement from paper files to electronic files. So VA is working very hard to do that. They scan documents. We're talking about millions of pages, literally. I can think of some of my client files that take up an entire drawer in a file cabinet in my office. And that's one person, not millions of veterans that we're talking about. So millions and millions of pieces of paper. Technology doesn't solve everything. What happens, though, is the VA scanning these millions of pieces of records, and once the electronic version is there, that actually becomes the record. Legal standards, that becomes the record. And does anybody want to shout out venture a guess here as to what happens with the paper after it's been scanned?
Shredded.
Shredded, you got it. It's being shredded. So we've already seen, can we imagine a problem? What would a problem with that be, potentially? Right. We all try to be fairly green with our printing practices, right? We try to do double-sided printing as often as possible. Scanners jam, problems happen. My colleague spoke with an attorney who had said this had already happened, where he thankfully had his own copies of some medical records for one of his clients, and he actually compared it with this new electronic record, and surprise, surprise, many pages were missing. I'm just giving that as just a teeny tiny thumbnail example, not to say it's awful, the VA is awful or anything, but really what we've seen, there are so many people spending so much time analyzing this problem and trying to solve the problem. And what we believe very strongly is there's really only one solution that could help this, and it's to hire more raters, to hire more people. Technology is wonderful and it does a lot, but it doesn't work without humans. And so we just can't emphatically state enough. The VA, what it absolutely must do, the reform that must happen, is more individuals must be hired to sift through this data, analyze it, and make decisions.
Ed, you spoke about your own personal claim you filed. Teresa, I know you have a professional experience filing these claims. For those who don't know, can you take us through the life of a claim? What exactly happens? Does a veteran go somewhere, fill something out, and they personally appear? How exactly does that work?
Well, I think, and this has been 5 years now since I last did it, but essentially, from the active duty member, what they would do is that they meet with someone on their, for those that might recall, you get the exit interview, so to speak, to use civilian terminology. But you get the TAPS training or the separation brief that allows you to hear about all these wonderful services that are available to you as a service member. And when you go through that, they will also give you some forms which you can fill out in order to submit your disability claim. Ultimately, that will get to the VA, but what you want to do is that you want to hook up with someone who knows what the forms mean and what the things and the places, the spots on the forms mean in order to fill them out correctly. And I was lucky in my respect because I had an individual whose sole job was to make certain that I filled out my VA claim correctly. In fact, including some things that I didn't think were, in fact, claimable under the VA, but in fact were, which was incredibly helpful because, again, you don't know going in, and they don't publicize the list of these are the things we'll pay for, these are the things that don't count. We don't care if you got injured in this manner. And if they had, it might make it a little simpler, but that's not the case. But after having gone through essentially several appointments with that individual to go through my medical record to see exactly what existing conditions, medical conditions I had incurred while on active duty and whether or not they were still bothering me at that particular time, the individual was able to help me file that particular form with the VA. And it was a fairly simple process, to be perfectly blunt. It was not something that was, and because I had assistance. Now, had I had to do it by myself, as many individuals do, because they aren't as lucky to be separating from a time frame or location that is conducive to the time, efforts, and energy to allow for that to occur. Many folks, as you can probably think of either yourself or your friends and family, where they actually left the service of the military rather quickly, either because they wanted to or because they were forced to, and didn't have that particular opportunity, are in a much more difficult situation to fill out those types of forms and to fill out, to get a just adjudication on their VA claim.
So often when people talk about what's required for, what's the standard here, how does someone get service connected for a disability, often a great analogy is used of a stool with 3 legs, because there are kind of the 3 most basic requirements. And so one is that the veteran either incurred some kind of an injury in service, and by injury that can really range anywhere from a broken arm that maybe the bone doesn't ever heal properly and the person loses mobility, to major depressive disorder. It really runs the gamut. But so it could either be an injury that happened while in service, or something, a pre-existing condition that may have been aggravated while the veteran served. So that's one leg of the stool. The second leg of the stool is does the person still have problems now? So, for example, when I was 21, a car hit me when I was riding on my bike, and I had a pretty severe ankle sprain. But thankfully, here we are, I won't say how many years later, it's fine. But we all know that that's not the case often with all injuries. So does the individual still have some kind of health problem? Does this condition still exist today? And then the third leg of the stool, which can be the most complicated, is connecting the two. Is there a nexus between the injury that happened in service and the conditions that the veteran is still facing now? So that's the baseline. And Dan, I know you do this every day as well, so you're familiar with lots of paperwork, right? We keep talking about files and paperwork. So you want to fill out a form, and thankfully there are individuals to help veterans do this, because I admit when I first started doing this work, and this was after having gone to law school and worked in other areas of law, I was totally confused when I first started doing veterans benefits work. That you've got to look at, okay, I want to fill out this initial form here, get it filed, but you also need to collect a lot of evidence. You need to sift through lots and lots and lots of paperwork. Could be about medical records, that could be from military service, from the VA, from private medical providers. You also often might need to do some factual research. Thank goodness for the internet is all I could say. We often need to track down old buddies from Vietnam that can even find pictures, old photographs to prove this person was in this place in Vietnam on this date, because it may not have been in the record. So I would say that in terms of the day-to-day, it's filing forms, sifting through evidence, making those legal and factual connections, and to be perfectly honest, a lot of appeals work. That there often can be some of it is tedious. I think you certainly need to have a good sense of humor about some of the errors. For example, when a client will call me and say, so the VA sent me some paperwork, but it doesn't have my name on it. It has another veteran's name and another veteran's social security number, and I'm receiving it, and I wonder where my letter is, my information. Or another example, one time I had a claim returned to me saying, we cannot process this claim because you didn't include the veteran's DD-214, which is someone's discharge certificate. So that letter that I received was stapled to another piece of paper, and that was the DD-214 that we had filed with it. So, lots of persistence, good sense of humor, get through the tedium. You get there eventually, but...
And I'd like to put stomp on what was just said with regards to the amount of evidence that's required for these types of claims. Because, as indicated, in order to assist the veteran, you need to make certain that you are able to provide that causal link between the current injury and the event that occurred while on active duty service. I was assisting one particular Vietnam veteran rather recently who was attempting to upgrade his disability rating based off of PTSD. Essentially, what he was telling me is that while at Vietnam and while in the Navy, he had witnessed a naval aviator crash essentially on the flight deck of one of the naval carriers. And it was obviously a very clearly traumatic blow for which any individual would conceivably have PTSD, but in order to receive any type of compensation or rating for it, he would have to prove that he actually was on that particular ship. Well, he wasn't assigned to that particular ship because that would have made it really easy. But as in the case of the Navy, they hop from ship to ship in order to get to different locations. And in this particular case, he needed to demonstrate that he was on that particular ship on that particular day, saw that particular individual die. The result that he got back from his VA claim was, you need to prove to us that this naval aviator died. Well, that was kind of an interesting response. So how did he do that? He went to the Vietnam Memorial and took out a piece of paper and a pencil and used the scratch marks in order to get the individual's name off of the wall and sent that to them and said, here's where he is. And that's when he finally got paid for it. That's how creative these things kind of have to be.
From your experience, what's the breakdown from veterans who try and do these claims themselves and those that have an attorney or another personal representative, and the chances of success for each one?
Yeah, that's a great question, and unfortunately, I don't know the answer to it. I know that there was an Army Times article a few years ago that cited, I think, a GAO study, Government Accountability Study, about success rates with and without representation. And I think at that time, the statistic was that veterans would be 25 times more likely to have success in their case with some form of representation. And we certainly have seen there are veteran service organizations, traditional veteran service organizations. We often think of American Legion, Disabled American Veterans, etc., that have individuals all over the country, claims representatives that do that work. And in California and in most states, there are county veteran service organizations that also provide assistance. Unfortunately, the overwhelming majority of those individuals don't have legal training. They often have to have as part of their mission or their requirement to assist every veteran that walks in the door. And so often that can mean only having the resources to fill out some forms and move on. Not having the same kinds of resources or abilities to do a lot of the research that we had talked about, doing some of the analysis that's needed, collecting needed evidence. So it can be difficult. I know at Swords to Plowshares, many of our clients are individuals who come to us needing assistance with appeals, that after having worked with another veteran service organization, and we are one as well, and we're just very, very fortunate to have a staff of attorneys who are the veteran service representatives doing that work. Yeah, it's difficult. I think it can be a very difficult process to get all of the nuance and get the needed representation.
You know, it's interesting. I liken this, that particular question about the success rate is how it applies to the law. What I usually tell young attorneys is that their abilities regarding their experiences, regarding their skill set, their knowledge base is very important in order to make certain that you tip the scales in your favor. But more importantly are the things that you can't tip in your favor. What I usually point to is politics. Whether you have the law on your side, you have the facts on your side, if you get the wrong political atmosphere, it doesn't matter, because you will, there's a good chance that you will lose that particular bout. In addition to politics, there's also what I call people. And I'll use an analogy to another legal setting. Most of you probably know about the case regarding Japanese internment and Fred Korematsu. And Fred Korematsu, of course, is one of the lead cases for Japanese internment. It actually happened here within the Bay Area, where Mr. Korematsu was placed into Japanese internment because he was Japanese, in addition to the thousands of others. Having said that, when that issue was over and he was seeking to appeal and overturn that particular decision, his legal team, a very bright group of folks who have gone on to bigger and better things, came down to realizing that in order to be successful with their appeal, they had to get this in front of the right judge. And at that particular time, in that political era, there was only 2 judges that they felt they had any shot of getting the judgment overturned. So what did they do? They gave it to what they considered the 2 most luckiest people on their team. And I kid you not, they said, oh, well, Sally's great, she's fantastic, she wins all these bingo matches and lotteries. We're going to send her to file in federal court. And sure enough, they did. They got the judge they wanted, and that's the result that they got. So it really does come down to luck and timing and what's available. So And if you don't get that particular mix in your recipe, you can't stop, particularly for the individual veteran that's working so hard to get his or her life back on track. Those folks don't like to hear that, well, we just didn't get the right judge this time. You've really got to sit down and war plan exactly how you're going to handle those sorts of situations.
Is it okay if I give a quick training flag?
Sure, go for it.
So if anyone is interested in assisting veterans with claims and representing vets, coming up very soon on November 1st, there'll be a day-long CLE hosted by the Practicing Law Institute, PLI. The website is pli.edu. And so this is 6 hours of CLE credit that individuals from our organization, Swords to Plowshares, and working with the State Bar and another wonderful colleague of ours, an attorney from the Legal Aid Foundation of Los Angeles. We've all been doing veterans benefits work for a long time, so this will be a free CLE that the first 3 hours cover what's required by the VA to become a VA accredited attorney to represent veterans. This is also wonderful training for non-attorneys as well, anyone who's interested in helping to represent veterans. We have an hour on veteran cultural competency issues because I think there are many people who want some pro bono work to do or want a way to be able to work with veterans, but may say, well, I never served, nobody in my family did, I don't know what it's like. So we've got some great information there, and then the afternoon sessions will encompass military discharge upgrades for individuals who may have received less than fully honorable discharges, and that then serves as a barrier to receiving VA benefits. So this will be a live program on November 1st. It'll at the PLI office in San Francisco. It'll also be available via live webcast. So I definitely want to encourage everyone and anyone who's interested to please check it out.
Do we have any questions from the audience? Yes, sir.
I have a question about, when you're talking about the sufficiency of medical evidence, one of the phrases that's needed is it's at least as likely. And what type of issues do you have and how do you resolve them for veterans that are seeing physicians in the military that treat them with soap notes, and then leave and go to a physician that treats them at a hospital or at their clinic that treats them with soap notes and the classic format that doesn't talk about causation? Do you send them to go get new reports that they have to pay for that are an evaluative report? What's your answer to that, please?
No, that's a great question, and I'll attempt to summarize it. Correct me if I'm doing a bad job. But what it had to do with was that causation question where VA uses a standard of at least as likely as not whatever medical condition was caused in military service was caused by the service. And that there can be medical records that may not address causation at all. In fact, they more often than not don't address causation, right? Now, thankfully, the issue of causation is not something that a treating physician is responsible for determining. Rather, veterans, once they apply for benefits, when you get to a certain point, they'll have to attend an exam, a medical exam known as a compensation and pension exam, where either a VA physician or a VA contracted physician does a report. That physician is supposed to review all of this, any additional medical evidence that was there, do the actual exam, and try to make somewhat of a determination. The VA raters look at that as well. I would say some of the most common conditions that we deal with are mental health conditions, often PTSD, for example, and we actually have some self-help materials for veterans who are going on their own to try to do this, but we also have basically like self-help materials for private mental health professionals so that they can also try to address some of this, and we provide them with some information about what language is useful. So clearly, attorneys can't tell doctors, gee, I really think you should come up with this, that, or the other conclusion, but we certainly can provide them with information about what would be most helpful in making a decision is to be sure to address the following issues. So we're not going to say, make sure you say that my client's condition is service-connected, but will you answer that question? Or will you take into consideration these factors and address that in what you write?
I think that was a fantastic answer. The idea that the ability of the physician to resolve all these issues is one that your client, the veteran, believes exists. But what they will be told, unfortunately, is that the physician is going to be either uncomfortable or he'll simply use the words, I cannot do that. Because number one, I cannot with medical certainty determine, because number one, I was not there, number two, I didn't see it, number three, we don't have the forensic evidence that would be able to support or technology to be able to unravel that. So currently, as an attorney for a healthcare system now, I see many attempts by attorneys trying to sway the opinions and reports written by doctors on a weekly basis. And nothing is more irritating to the doctors than a lawyer trying to impose his medical opinion on that of the medical practitioner. So don't try that, because you're going to get an absolute big fat no. What you can do is exactly what my colleagues indicated, which is to provide the information that is most weighted heavily by the VA in order to determine those types of issues, and to use the terminology. And that's really what it is. They need to speak, the VA speak, in order for the VA to recognize that this, in fact, is a claim that they are payable on. So I appreciate, many times when physicians and nurses, PAs are given instructions by either the patient themselves or by a representative, and that goes over so much more smoothly than the straight-out blunt force trauma that an attorney usually uses, which is to say, my client needs this. And I can guarantee you that any doctor that has ever sought my counsel has never gotten the answer, okay, put that down.
Other audience questions?
So I don't know much about this, but I've heard, you mentioned something about getting before the right judge.
Yes.
So my understanding is that veterans can't get into federal court to appeal benefits issues or perhaps even other issues as well. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, and really wishing that Gordy Erstfarmer was able to come today, as he's someone who's litigated all the way to the Supreme Court on behalf of veterans for many decades. So the VA is an administrative agency, right? All of the claims fall under APA, Administrative Procedures Act, meaning if you want to get to federal court, you need to exhaust all of your administrative remedies. So within the VA, you would start off a claim at a VA regional office. If you aren't successful and you appeal it, you appeal and that appeal remains within the regional office. It can then move on to what's known as the BVA, Board of Veterans Appeals. If you still don't like the remedy, you still don't get what you need, you can then go to a specialized court that is the Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims. is a court, special court in DC. If you still don't get the remedy that you seek, at that point you can then go to federal circuit court. More often than not, case is resolved before it has to get that far. We're very, very lucky, talking about luck, as you were mentioning earlier, that we are able to resolve almost all of our claims at this BVA, or Board of Veterans Appeals level. For example, of a caseload of, I want to say, approximately 320 cases that we have right now, only one of those is in the Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims at the moment. It can be difficult, and I don't feel sufficiently knowledgeable to speak in great depth about what courts have left open and what they foreclosed in terms of options for veterans. But I guess I will say I definitely suggest looking up the VCS, which is Veterans for Common Sense versus Shinseki case, the Ninth Circuit case that had to do with the VA's responsibility to provide mental health services to veterans, and also about veterans' constitutional rights to seek redress as a class for getting access to benefits that they deserved. Had a really wonderful decision from the Ninth Circuit on this a few years ago, and then unfortunately Department of Justice appealed and went to the full Ninth Circuit and did not have great results.
Let me just follow up, because I just want to make clear up the initial question. And I think Dean Van Cleef's question was a very good one, because there is a lot of confusion with regards to whether or not, or excuse me, what legal rights veterans have with regards to these claims, and confusing that with what rights or rights they don't have with regards to suing the federal government while they're on active duty, because that is where the individual military member, while on active duty, is not permitted to sue for any injuries that may occur to them while they are on active duty service, as well as anything that might result in it. So under the Federal Tort Claims Act, the federal government has allowed itself to be sued under certain circumstances by folks within the United States, but through what is called the Ferries decision, a Supreme Court decision, they have determined that military members are unable to sue the federal government during their time in service for any of those injuries for which they might occur out of military activity. And what is interesting is that they rule virtually everything while on active duty service to be military activity within a 24-hour period, 7 days a week, 365 days a year time frame. So essentially, those individuals, military members who receive injuries in the battlefield, you can see why you would not want an individual to be able to sue their commander, right, for ordering them into battle down a particular alley, and it was poorly lit, and then all of a sudden they were ambushed, and now they've lost their limbs or whatever it is. It's understandable that that's one of the attritions of the occupation. But then there become other issues with regards to medical malpractice, such as an individual who goes into a medical facility as a military member in a military facility and then receives treatment from a military medical professional, and somehow his appendix is not removed, but something else is removed, or there's a nick, or there's a cut, and some unfortunate adverse action may occur with regards to that individual. Many folks believe, and I'm not certain that they're wrong, that the individual is not performing a military activity at the time that they are receiving their appendix to be removed. Okay? And then therefore, that individual, and any individual, at the time of surgery, or medical treatment should in fact be able to receive compensation for that particular negligence that occurs to their body. There have been many attempts to change the Ferries Act, excuse me, the Ferries Bar, and most recently, one coming out of the Marines by a Marine member by the name of Rodriguez, who unfortunately was the victim of skin cancer that was delayed in diagnosis. And it just so happened that while he was being interviewed on television by a local news crew for his illness, he actually died while on television. Now, if you can't think that you're going to get any more compelling evidence of an individual who has received, who has become a victim of medical negligence within the military and therefore should be compensated while dying on television, recorded television, I'm not certain that you can. And yet, that particular attempt was also rebuffed and not successful in changing the law. So, to answer the original question, veterans can sue, but active duty military members and for any injuries that occurred while on active duty service cannot receive compensation outside of the VA process.
And just an interesting note on malpractice issues that certainly, I guess anytime there are medical practitioners, malpractice issues can come up, just like anytime there are attorneys, malpractice issues can arise, right? Part of life. So the VA actually has a process for handling malpractice issues, and that just like veterans can get service-connected disability compensation, they can also receive monthly disability compensation benefits if they have a lasting health condition that was a result of medical negligence on the part of the VA. And so it's interesting, there's actually a very similar claims process that one goes through. In addition to that, veterans do have the option of suing VA under FTCA, Federal Tort Claims Act.
We spoke a lot about service-connected injuries, and injuries that occur during military service and continued disability in life. But what other VA benefits are out there that you would say go underused, and what legal barriers are there preventing them from being used?
Just better benefits in general?
Yeah.
Well, that's a good question. And I appreciate it because it's a nice little segue. I think the biggest barrier to folks utilizing their benefits is that they just simply don't know that they exist. It really comes down to informing an individual through some, whether it be written format, through a book format, through a spokesperson, a speaker, a website, something that allows the individual veteran to learn, hey, this is something that's available to you, whether it be at a nominal fee or free, at a discounted rate or whatever else it is. Because there are several different things that are available to military veterans throughout the country. Now, what I will also say is that this isn't just federal benefits, but they are also state benefits that also benefit the veterans. The individual states have decided on their own to either award or compensate military veterans for certain things, whether it be for fishing licenses, whether it be for hunting licenses, for license plates, for entry into state or national parks, in addition to certain states, such as California and Texas, allow for educational benefits for the veteran. Many of them don't even know that. In fact, if I were to take a poll with the young folks in the state of California who are currently serving, and to ask them, are you aware of your educational benefits that are permissible for you to receive if you were to stay as a resident here in the state of California, I'm fairly certain that number would be well above 80% that would say, I have no idea what that is. And thankfully, the state of California has identified that as a barrier to them receiving or utilizing their benefits. So they put together a book. Well, first they put together a committee, who then put together a book that specifically outlines the individual's benefits. And thankfully, my colleague, Major Mike Felson from the United States Air Force Jet Corps, is here today and has, right Mike? Has brought several of these books from the organization to pass out for those that want them, that outline all the federal and state benefits that are available to the individual in the state of California.
Thank you so much for that, because I was definitely thinking the same thing, that I think in terms of underutilization, the biggest issue is not knowing that those benefits are there. Just two other quick thoughts on that. One is there can be eligibility barriers. So often we see one of the most sought after benefit from the military, I'm talking about federal level, are GI Bill benefits, educational benefits. They're only available to veterans who have fully honorable discharges. So it's approximately 75% of individuals who serve in the military get honorable discharges, but 25% is still a pretty big number of veterans who wouldn't have that available to them. So that's one of many reasons why we do military discharge upgrade work. Just a very quick thumbnail sketch of an instance where someone might not receive that benefit. I would say the overwhelming majority of our military discharge upgrade caseload looks like the following. A younger veteran who served in combat in Iraq or Afghanistan was a pretty stellar service member, didn't have any disciplinary problems. After engaging in heavy combat, may have been dealing with some post-traumatic stress, and for a whole host of reasons that maybe never went detected. It was never diagnosed, it was never treated. With both post-traumatic stress disorder and TBI, traumatic brain injury, the symptoms of those conditions can often be confused for misconduct. Of course, order and discipline is absolutely necessary in the military, but if you've got someone who is constantly talking back, maybe is self-medicating through the use of drugs or alcohol, that's a problem. That person's not going to be able to perform adequately in the military. However, if that's viewed as misconduct, so again, going back to many of our clients, have people, stellar service member, no disciplinary problems, wonderful marks on everything, all of a sudden starts self-medicating, gets a positive urinalysis for marijuana, or another drug, gets kicked out of the military with no access to benefits, when really what was needed was medical treatment. So there are processes you can go through the VA in order to regain that eligibility for VA medical care, VA disability compensation. But the only way to kind of regain that access to a GI Bill benefit is by going to a military discharge review board to try and get that discharge upgraded. Other thing I just want to mention quickly, I'm so glad you mentioned state benefits and underutilization. Just last week, I believe, Governor Brown went ahead and assigned something so that on the, I believe, June 2014 ballot, there will be a voter initiative about repurposing some state funds that had originally been set aside for veteran farm loans. California, we're actually very, very lucky that the state of California has very robust benefits for military veterans. But there are millions and millions of dollars that have been sitting around in state coffers for these particular loans, and weren't being utilized. I know there was a really interesting newspaper article about this a ways back, that there's a particular state office that I believe had 83 employees working on this particular program, it had only processed 80 loan applications in a year. So you needed more than one person, our tax dollars at work. But in any case, this wonderful initiative is to repurpose that funding for the state to be able to use it to assist low-income homeless veterans, to be able to use those state funds for permanent supportive housing for formerly homeless veterans, etc.
Do we have other audience questions at this time? Oh, yes, ma'am.
Somewhat paradoxical question, we're talking about not getting appropriate medical treatment. On the other hand, occasionally you have situations in which somebody's either over-medicated, or for example, they might be prescribed an SSRI and it might trigger a sequence of bipolar episodes. Is there any, that's such a nuanced field, is there any record of success making some of those arguments?
Well, I think, what she just brought up is, we talked about inappropriate medical treatment, but she also mentioned what are some issues surrounding perhaps over-medication, or SSRI use that, I'm sorry, you mentioned maybe could trigger an episode.
Depressive bipolar episodes, or in some particular subset, are known in late adolescence to be more likely to trigger suicidal depressive episodes per se, rather than some period of PTSD.
Right. So basically, SSRIs, certain class of antidepressant medication, could that, in some instances, trigger bipolar disorder or bipolar episodes. Brought up an interesting point about how bipolar disorder, for example, like schizoaffective disorder or some other mental health disorders, often don't start to manifest until late teens, early 20s. When we often think about when have many service members been deployed overseas, what age are they? Late teens, early 20s. So it certainly can be difficult to discern what's causing what's happening. I do know that there's certainly been a lot of light recently shed on the military and VA's over-medication, particularly for mental health disorders. I wish I had more information that I could speak to. I think there were some articles about treatment at Fort Lewis, Washington in particular. That could be difficult if someone is so heavily medicated that the person then just isn't functioning at all. If you want to add to that.
I appreciate the question because it turns the issue kind of on its head. Basically, is the medication itself the problem? And this is, to answer your question, one of the most difficult areas in order to get any type of traction or success, because your medical professionals are going to be so unwilling to take on that particular cause because they're the ones that are prescribing, right? So essentially, they would have to be admitting somehow in a report that the initial diagnosis, the initial dosage that they provided to the patient was inefficient and inaccurate to affect a worsening of the patient's mental health status. So that's why I say it's a very good question. Unfortunately, I am unaware of any success in this particular area because of those particular dynamics that make it very tough to get any kind of traction.
We're down to just our last couple minutes here, so I want to ask you both kind of one final question. You can include any closing thoughts you may have as well. Out of everyone we have here in this room, what is there that everyone can do either on individual or group level to improve some of the problems we've discussed today, whether it's improving access to VA benefits or just passing along the knowledge? What is there that we can do?
So I guess the main thought I have is to just talk with your peers, your colleagues, your friends, your families about veterans issues. That it's not an invisible population, and that government has an obligation to provide necessary care, necessary services for veterans. And I guess just to keep that in mind and to think about the fact that so many benefits are not automatic. I know working in legal services, thankfully there's certainly been a very positive movement for public interest legal services organizations to recognize legal needs of veterans. But I think for so long, individuals who may not have any military connection or veteran connection may not realize that it's, that they may have the assumption that, oh, it's a cakewalk, veterans get everything, it's all automatic. It's not true.
I'm sorry, that was just a very good comment. What I can say is that just by being here today, honestly, is a huge step. And I want to thank Dean Van Cleve for putting this together because the opportunity to learn these types of issues and to get the level of professionals in the room discussing the issue is almost non-existent. And so the ability to meet here, to provide the information, to answer some questions, and to see, again, the fact that you all have sat here now in this incredible, for those of you that haven't been outside, it's gorgeous. And to sit here on a Friday is very impressive with regards to your level of interest and commitment to this particular issue. We have talked about opportunities where you can volunteer. First, the PLI CLE is a fantastic opportunity to get the training, to get the understanding, to get the opportunity to meet the folks that can put you in the right position to start helping folks as of that week, honestly. And this area is so ripe for volunteerism, both legally and just as a citizen, in able to assist those veterans that really need the help. And so taking just what you learned today, and if you just talk to a friend saying, you know what I was at today? I was at this particular conference and I learned these things about veterans and the issues that they're facing. And then that ripples on to the next individual. She says, oh, you know what, he was interested in that, and maybe the next time I see something like that, whether it be a CLE, whether it be a conference, whether it be a television show, or a newspaper article, I'll take the time to either watch it or read it and then perhaps pass it on to somebody else. That's how this particular information and this particular help occurs, because honestly, it's not coming from the top down, it's not coming from big government, and so your individual interest in this area is both very encouraging and much needed for the assistance of this very vulnerable population.
Thank you both very much.
Thank you all. Thank you, Dan, for moderating the panel. That was really, really terrific. That was the perfect way to end this panel and to end the conference, at least the informational part. I'll tell you more about that in a minute, about what everybody can do individually. My goals are bigger than that. I would like us to start to form coalitions within the legal community so that we can really do more to assist veterans within the legal community, law schools, veterans advocates, etc. And I do want to tie back to another comment about politics. For me, this is really about the people, not about the politics. And I think it's really unfortunate when politics gets in the way of assisting people who need assistance. Okay, so I told you that one of the things I learned from working with the students is the need for some career counseling. And so beginning at 4:30, back up in the room where we had lunch, we will have lawyers to talk about how you, future lawyers, can translate your experience, your very valuable experience, for civilian employers. Those of you who might be interested in being JAG attorneys, we have some JAG lawyers here to talk about that as well. So I hope to see you all at 4:30 back up on the 5th floor. Again, thank you all. So now you get an hour outside and then come back in. Again, thank you all for being here, and I look forward to following up with each and every one of you to see how we can continue to partner and bring these issues to the forefront. Thank you very much.